Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features X-Men, that is Adjectiveless X-Men, number 28, cover dated January 1994. Cover art here by Andy Kubert, inked by Matthew Ryan, and an interesting design decision to leave the background completely white, which of course makes the foreground figures pop. Jean Grey versus Sabretooth, and Sabretooth's forearm massively obscuring the cover logo as well, just giving a sense of his hulking figure looming menacingly over Jean Grey. So let's open this one up to the first page, and what we have is Jubilee fleeing from some pursuer in a autumnal forest, and the question asked at the beginning, what can firecrackers do against an atom bomb? So she's sweating from fear here. Turn the page, and she is being pursued by Sabretooth, who leaps from a tree towards her, and obviously you'd imagine he's about to rip her apart. So the title of the story is Devil in the House, and the creative team: Fabian Nicieza, writer; Andy Kubert, penciler; Matt Ryan, inker; Bill Oakley, letterer; and Joe Rosas, colorist. So what happens next? After this arresting anchor image, turn the page. It was all a dream. It was all, in particular, a nightmare. So Jubilee wakes up from her nightmare. Jean Grey arrives in to ask, is everything okay? And she says that she had a nightmare that Sabretooth killed Scott and Wolverine, and he killed all of the X-Men. So Jean comforts Jubilee. I love the little detail of Illyana's Nightcrawler doll there on the night shelf of Jubilee's night shelf. And Jean comforts Jubilee, and she mentally calls Scott, who's working down in the hangar underneath the X-Mansion. He's working away on the Blackbird, and she tells him she's telepathically contacting Aurora and Hank. Also, they have to go out. It's after 2 a.m, he says, where do you want to go? So there's Jubilee with the Banff doll, Illyana's Banff doll. And so they meet up in Harry's Hideaway pub in Salem Centre, Westchester, not far from Xavier's school. Nice establishing shot of the exterior of Harry's Hideaway. Recently rebuilt in the middle of the night by the Beast and Archangel. So they're here in a booth. So Harry's Hideaway open late, you might say, and what they have here is a discussion about Professor X's decision at the end of X-Men Unlimited number 3 to take in Sabretooth to the X-Mansion and help him. So Jean here says that she feels that they have to talk. So these are basically at this point like the senior kind of leadership ranked members of the X-Men. And Aurora says, Jean, I know you as well as I do myself. You need say no more. You are troubled by Professor Xavier's decision to allow Sabretooth into the mansion so that he can be treated for his uncontrollable bouts of violent rage. And Hank is on Jean's side. Aurora takes up the point that the purpose of the school is to help mutants cope with and gain control over their abilities. But Hank makes the point as he finishes his pint. The flaw with that logic, Aurora, is that Sabretooth's abilities include heightened senses, strength and agility, as well as a handy-dandy healing factor. And as a grown man, he already has complete control over those powers. Sabretooth's problems are fundamentally psychological in nature. I agree with Jean. How far do our responsibilities extend? But Cyclops actually takes the position that they should help Sabretooth. He says, from what you and the professor found after Creed literally came knocking down our door demanding help, is that his mind has been so drastically fractured by a combination of memory implants as well as traumatic experiences that no one can tell exactly what the man is or isn't responsible for. So the debate continues, and there is no agreement between Scott, Aurora, Jean and Hank regarding what to do about Sabretooth, but Jean concludes by saying, how can we trust any move we make, any word we say with a madman like Sabretooth in the house? So the issue needs to be addressed, and then we're back at the X Mansion here. And we have Professor X down in Med Lab. He's spending a lot of time down there lately, what with the legacy virus ravaging mutants in the world. And one of the victims of the virus is Revanche. And so the disease now is expressing itself in these blisters over her skin. And Professor X asks her, "What are your plans, Elizabeth?" And she says, "Plans, Professor? What have I planned? Have you forgotten I'm going to die?" And he says, "You misunderstood me. I merely meant that as the disease progresses, will you stay here at the mansion so we can continue treatment? Study me is more the like, isn't it? Poked and prodded like a laboratory animal? I think not. I'm going to die as I have lived, Professor, with the wind at my back and blood on my hands." So what does that mean? Well, Professor X is interrupted in his ruminating on the meaning of her words by Moira MacTaggart, who alerts him that they have a problem with Sabretooth. He's been acting up again, she says. And of course Professor X is exasperated, so he meets them down in whichever room they're in, and they're watching security monitor playback of Psylocke going into Sabretooth's cell, which she did in order to treat him with her telepathic abilities, but he was there waiting for her despite her ninja training and as Moira says, the quiet poise of a snowfall. So here he is, anchor image, great anchor image of him rushing out of his room at Psylocke. And basically what he needs is he needs telepathic therapy to help him contain his homicidal rage. That's what's going on here. And Psylocke is more than a match for him with her ninja training, but he manages to grab her arm before she strikes him with her Psyblade, and he kisses her. And of course, Psylocke and Sabretooth have a history going all the way back to Mutant Massacre, going back in particular to Uncanny X-Men 212 and 13. And so he tosses her outside of the cell, refuses her providing the telepathic therapy, because who he wants is, he wants the redhead. She can give him the glow, and maybe I can give it to her too, he says. So Moira reports that was over an hour ago. Apparently Sabretooth is eating 20 meals a day as well. And Moira makes the point that field studies suggest the metabolic rate of carnivores slows down rapidly after digesting the rewards of the hunt. I'd say Creed more than meets the requirements for a wild animal. So she's of the opinion that feeding him regularly also keeps him pacified. So now Rogue has volunteered to take him his latest meal. And Professor X asks, Banshee, you asked her to get involved? Actually, she volunteered. So a point that's made in this issue by Professor X and Scott is that in the past, the Professor has brought in violent mutants with criminal histories. Violent in the case of Wolverine, a violent mutant with criminal history in the case of Rogue, in order to help them get control of their abilities and help them reform themselves and redeem themselves. So it's interesting that Rogue would volunteer to bring the food, these steaks, to Sabretooth, but he uses it as an opportunity to sow some doubts in her mind about Gambit's intentions towards her. And he says to Rogue that, well, he says to Gambit here, when Gambit is goading him, he says, maybe one day I'll tell your little filly about Paris. Then we'll see what she starts thinking of you. And Rogue bravely asks, why don't you tell me now? As he spits the bone out onto his plate. Okay, so we get past these advertisements here. And here he is, jumping out of his room again. Sabretooth, and he says, nah, that would make it too easy. You should find out for yourself, Frail. You should start to trust him, start to care, to fall head over heels for him, then watch as he takes everything you have to give, and I mean everything, X-Man. So Gambit has had enough of him, but great anchor image here of Sabretooth. I like this one in particular. Sabretooth responds, "That ain't even a start, Cage, and check this one out. It's even new to me. Rogue, you call Mystique your mother because she raised you since you were a pup, right?" And Rogue says, "And what if she did? Well then, next time you see her, ask her how your long lost brother is doing." And then he closes the door to his room. And that's interesting because there's a double reference there to the fact that it's recently been revealed that Sabretooth and Mystique had a son, and that son is Graydon Creed, who is head of the anti-mutants group Friends of Humanity. And also he's teasing here perhaps about Nightcrawler. And for more on that, we'll have to look at X-Men Unlimited number 4, so you can expect a video on that coming shortly. And then it's 3 a.m. in Professor X's study, and Jean is angry with the professor. She says, "I hope you realize our questioning of the decisions you've been making lately only comes out of concern we feel for you." And he responds, "I do actually. I expected it. But my decisions are my own, Jean, and they have been extremely difficult ones to make. These are difficult times, perhaps the most so since I founded the X-Men. The loss of both Peter and Logan hit me especially hard, as it did all of us, and there hasn't been a night I haven't lain awake thinking about Illyana and Magnus. But do either of you think that I've lost sight of our goals?" So we continue along the lines of this argument about what the X-Men is about, the possibility of redemption. But Scott makes the point, "We know things have been stressful, Professor. We know you feel guilty about Illyana's death and about what happened with Magneto. We just want to be sure that taking Creed in like this, even as a prisoner, isn't simply a way of seeking some sort of compensation." And Professor continues, "For a guilty conscience, there may be some truth to that concern, Scott." And it is an interesting point that, Charles did try to allow Magneto a path to redemption by appointing him headmaster of the school while he was away with Lilandra in the Shi'ar galaxy. And during that time, Magneto was headmaster of the New Mutants. And so, he kind of regards himself as having failed in relation to Magneto. Hence, he wiped his mind back in X-Men number 25. And so, is it some guilt that's motivating him by taking in Sabretooth? Interesting question. And then Scott brings up the point to Jean that, he says to her, "This is about Logan, isn't it?" So this is something for her to consider. And so they have this interesting chat here where Scott says to her, "I know how you felt, still do, I guess. I understand it too. The fire burning inside him, the dangerous side of things can be incredibly exciting. I can see how that excitement's always appealed to you. You and he always shared that passion for life." And she responds by saying it was a long time ago, a confusing time. And she says, though, "When I first met Wolverine, heard him, argued with him that first night in the garden, it wasn't so much what I saw in him as what he made me see in myself. It frightened me. I saw a side I didn't think existed, a side I liked. What does that say about the kind of person I am, Scott?" So this is going back to Claremont's retconning of Jean's interest in Wolverine from the beginning, which isn't there in the original issues, but which is written in the backup stories to Classic X-Men and in Claremont's revisions of those original stories reprinted in Classic X-Men. So Nicieza drawing on that material by Claremont here for the characterization of Jean, and what might be some of the reason why she is particularly concerned about Sabretooth being in the X-Mansion. So she goes to take on Sabretooth and provide him his telepathic therapy, and she gets suited up to do it too in her X-Men costume, and then she goes to Sabretooth's room, and he says to her in shadow, this is a great sequence here, I knew you'd come, Red. Sooner or later you had to come. And she says to him, you're awfully sure of yourself, Creed? Care to tell me why? 'Cause of him, 'cause of Logan. Okay, so Sabretooth comes out with some pop psychology, says, I'm just like him. You know that, don't you, Red? I'm the dark reflection in the mirror, and it scares you so bad you can taste it. You're afraid you're about to lose it forever, ain't you, Red? You know Logan and me were two sides of the same coin. You felt something for him, everyone knows that. Tell me, how do I make you feel? Your blood boiling yet, babe, as he leaps at her. But the defense systems at the doorway of the room activate and electrocute him, so he's knocked back into the room. But then Jean shuts down the defense security grid, and Scott understands that what she's doing is that she needs to walk into his cell and meet the devil face to face. So this is the devil in the house of the title for this particular story. So she attacks him verbally. I look at you and I wonder, does he really think he can get to me? It couldn't be your crudity, your viciousness is meant to intimidate me. Sorry, pal, it doesn't work, she says. And he responds, no, I'm sure it don't. You need something else out of me, like this. And he lashes out at her with his claws. And she responds with a telekinetic protective bubble. You're joking, aren't you? You're a firecracker, Creed, and I'm an atom bomb. And that picks up on that narration from Jubilee's nightmare earlier in the issue, the question that started the story. Jean's the atom bomb. And why should she then be afraid of someone like Sabretooth? So she uses her TK to make him attack himself with his claws and throws him up against the wall. She says to Sabretooth that he's not even in Wolverine's league. You want the truth? There was something between the two of us, a bond, a deep loving friendship, but you can't understand that. Logan is a man of spirit, he has a soul, Creed, and you're afraid to admit how pathetic your entire life has been, living day to day from one fix to the next. And what is your drug of choice, Creed? Is it the cold-blooded murder of people? The answer is the cold-blooded murder of people the answer to your addiction, or is it the mind-numbing glow you look for when your psyche is held together by a salve that robs you of conscience? And he says, I don't know which, and I don't really care. Well, you better care, she says to him, Creed. You really, really better. Coming here didn't solve your problem, Creed. It was merely the first step to ending your threat. The X-Men like Logan may seem weak to someone like you, but I assure you, cross us, and you'll wish you'd never been born. So, great top-down anchor image here of Sabretooth on the floor, ripped t-shirt, ripped trousers, nicely drawn, nicely laid out, these pages. So he says to Jean, you pushed me, Red. I feel it coming on. I need that glow. That bird you gave me, I need it now. And that was the telepath that he operated with and who recently died. And that's why his homicidal urges are getting out of control. And she tells him, ask for it. Give me the glow, please, he says. No. What do you mean, no? Birdie gave you the glow because you threatened her. Well, she's dead, Sabretooth, and you don't scare me. You want the glow, find it on your own. And that's her last word to him in terms of the fact that he's going to have to take responsibility for himself. She says, deal with what you are, with what you've done, face up to your crimes, Creed, and to your victims. Stop running away for once, because there's no place to run. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll face the world like the rest of us. The question you have to ask yourself, Sabretooth, is, do you have the guts to do it? So that leaves him silent. He's got nothing to say in return. And then it's morning the next day, and Jubilee decides that she's going to take Creed breakfast. Lots of bacon and eggs there for Sabretooth. And she brings him his heaped plate of bacon and eggs, and he's meditating here. That's interesting. And the door to his cell opens, and he says to Jubilee, Tell Red she's the one with guts, real guts. Tell her Logan couldn't have done better. So, interesting response that by Sabretooth. And then back to the narrative captions. She doesn't know what to say, so she doesn't say anything. The trip didn't help her fear go away. In many ways, his words, brusque and guttural, only made it worse. And Jubilee wonders, is this what it's always going to be like with him here? Is this how he's always going to make me feel? She wonders. She sees the look in Jean's eyes, the concern, and she knows the answer is yes. So, next issue, Psylocke and Archangel accept an invitation to the Hellfire Club. But this was an interesting issue of X-Men, featuring the X-Men dealing with the fallout of Professor X's decision to take in and help Sabretooth, and calling back to the fact that Sabretooth has been a homicidal mutant responsible for many killings during the mutant massacre, a lot of blood on his hands. Why should they help him? And, an interesting reflection on those moral questions emerging from this particular issue. I hope you liked the review. If you did, please like it in YouTube. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.